Good evening and welcome to World News Tonight. I'm your host, Klaudia Czerwińska. In today's edition, we will first focus on the mounting speculation around a possible prisoner swap between Russia and the U.S. after at least 9 prisoners disappeared from Russian jails. After that, we will discuss Iran's vow to avenge the killing of Ismail Haniyeh, one of Hamas's senior leaders who had been in Tehran. Remember to stay with us until the very end, as I will be joined in the studio by a very special guest, the director of the National Army Museum in London, Justin Maciejewski, to talk about all things Warsaw Uprising. But before we dive in, let's have a look at the latest headlines. Could a possible U.S.-Russian prisoner swap be in the cards? Thursday will see major commemorations of the 80th anniversary of the Warsaw Uprising. Taylor Swift is about to begin the Warsaw leg of her Eras tour. Russian oppositionist Vladimir Karamura has been moved from his prison in Siberia to an undisclosed location in what rights activists are saying is a possible sign that a prisoner swap with the West may be close. Joining us now, live from Kyiv with more details, is our correspondent Oz Katerji. Good evening, Oz. Do we have any more details on Karamura's location? Have there been any signs from Moscow that a prisoner exchange can be negotiated at this time?
So Moscow actually commented on this yesterday. They declined to comment rather on this yesterday when speculation was asked. They were asked. Dmitry Peskov was asked in a press conference. So we don't have anything official coming out of Moscow, at least. What we do know is that Vladimir Karamura was moved from his penal colony in Omsk in Siberia. That's according to the Russian prison service, to an undisclosed location. We don't know where he is. And other notable prisoners have been moved in recent days. And according to their lawyers, speaking to the press, they don't know where they currently are either. That includes the former U.S. Marine Paul Whelan, who has been detained by Russia. Now, with regards to a prison swap, this was actually mooted again with Peskov in a statement he said to the press in mid-June, in which he talked about there being contacts with the United States regarding this issue, particularly with regards to the Wall Street Journal journalist Evan Gershkovich, who has been falsely imprisoned in Russia, also convicted in Russia of false charges. Now, Dmitry Peskov said that they confirmed that the contacts had taken place, but said that they should be conducted in complete silence. So no word to the press beyond that. So we don't have anything official coming out of Moscow, out of the US. But more interestingly, now this topic was brought up by Vladimir Putin himself with that interview earlier in the year with Tucker Carlson, in which Evan Gershkovich's imprisonment was again raised. And Putin spoke about what he described as a patriot being held in Berlin. This is a man named Vadim Krasikov, who was convicted of an assassination in Berlin in 2019. So this is a very, very serious prisoner involved in a political assassination for Russia, currently imprisoned in Berlin. That Putin specifically name-checked when asked about any potential prison swaps. So no idea if the US even have the sway to talk to Berlin about something like that. That is still not known. But as it stands, it's unconfirmed that there's anything other than these prisoners have been moved to undisclosed locations.
Thank you so much. Please keep us posted. That was Oz Katerji coming to us from Kyiv. Russia launched the biggest drone attack against Ukraine in months. The Ukrainian army says it shot down 89 kamikaze drones and 1 cruise missile overnight. Air raid alerts sounded throughout the Ukrainian capital all night. The Russian attack came in several waves. All of the projectiles were shot down by the Ukrainian air defense. President Volodymyr Zelensky says that situation shows that Ukrainians can fully protect their skies from Russian strikes when they have sufficient supplies. According to anonymous sources cited by Bloomberg, the first F-16 fighter jets have already arrived in Ukraine. Belarusian President Alexander Lukashenko has decided to pardon a German national who was sentenced to death on terrorism charges. The move comes amid rumors of possible prisoner swaps between the wider West and Belarus and Russia.
Following his arrest, Rico Krieger was faced with a truly overwhelming list of charges. These included terrorism, creating an extremist group, intentionally damaging a vehicle, illegal operations with firearms and explosives, and mercenary activity. The trial led to Rico Krieger being sentenced to death.
We must do everything possible so that his rights are preserved. The death penalty was abandoned in Europe. It is illegal. There are clear regulations on the treatment of foreign nationals, and we are doing everything we can to best support the German national.
Krieger would go on to apologize for his actions on national TV, calling for Belarusian President Alexander Lukashenko to pardon him. The authoritarian leader decided to do so on the very same day. In the words of Annalena Baerbock, it was unbearable how the Belarusian regime paraded a German national on television. Rico Krieger falls into the category of prisoners who have recently disappeared from Belarusian and Russian prisons. They are also outspoken opponents of Moscow's invasion of Ukraine. Western politicians and activists say their disappearance from their cells is likely a sign of a possible prisoner swap.
The 80th anniversary of the beginning of the Warsaw Uprising is right around the corner. Commemorations have already begun in the Polish capital. The presidents of Poland and Germany have attended a military field mass in Warsaw to mark the occasion. Both leaders are also giving speeches at this solemn event. Our reporter Alex Sumilinski has more. Alex, thank you so much for joining us. So, what can you tell us about what happened at the event so far?
Good evening. So I am coming live to you from the Krasiński Square in the Polish capital. Behind me, you can probably see the monument, which is dedicated to those who went to fight for what they value the most 80 years ago, and that is their freedom. Now, as I'm speaking, the president of the capital, Warsaw, is speaking. What happened before was the presidents of Poland and of Germany, as well as many representatives, Polish officials, including the president of Warsaw, as well as the Polish Minister of Defense, veterans, those who took part in that heroic battle which started 80 years ago, but also multiple representatives of the Polish armed forces. Now, the Polish president, Andrzej Duda, when he began his speech, he began with a question asking, why are we here? He asked this multiple times, and then he went on to say that we are here because, and we continue to remember and commemorate the Warsaw Uprising of 1944, because it is important that we continue to commemorate the goal of those who went into that battle, and that is the fight for freedom. He also went on to add that the Warsaw Uprising is the moral basis of Polish independence. He also referred to the battle that Ukraine is fighting nowadays against the Russian occupier, adding that the free world, of which Poland is, of course, a member after having fought for its independence, the whole free world does not agree to any occupation of any sort. Now, after the Polish president spoke, the president of Germany began his speech. Now, he described the Warsaw Uprising as a cruel chapter in German-Polish history. He also said that the fact of not giving in to terror, that fight against the occupant, these are all symbols to which he gives his utmost respect. He also said that Germans cannot forget the pain and suffering that they brought up on Poland after they invaded the country on September 1st, 1939. And then he went on to address specifically all the veterans that were present here today, and he said that he is asking for their forgiveness, to which he received a round of applause. Now, August 1st, 1944, was, of course, the day when 80 years ago, the inhabitants of the capital city of Poland, that is Warsaw, having been fed up with 5 years of occupation, daily terror, as well as mass executions in their streets, went to fight for what they believed was their highest value, and that was their freedom. Back to you, Claudia.
This is definitely going to be a very eventful 24 hours. Alex Sumilinski Machvi coming from the Krashinsky Square in Warsaw. Thank you so much for joining. European officials have been outraged by Hungary's new national card migration program, which enables Russians and Belarusians to enter the EU. The European People's Party leader, Manfred Webster, said the move is likely to become a security risk for the whole Schengen area.
Earlier this week, Manfred Weber condemned Hungary's move to relax its migration laws in a letter to the President of the European Council, Charles Michel. Budapest is planning to include the citizens of Russia and Belarus in its national card scheme, a card that will let them work in Hungary for 2 years and which is much easier to obtain than an actual work visa.
It's much more easy for Russian citizens, and it's much more easy for Russian intelligence come to the European Union. It's not only to Hungary, but Hungary open really the Schengen space to Russian operation of intelligences.
After 3 years of working in Hungary, which requires them to renew the national card at least once, all holders of the card would qualify for permanent residency. The idea of Russian and Belarusian citizens roaming around the Schengen area has raised eyebrows around the EU, with the European Commission saying it will clarify the scope of this scheme and whether or not it falls under the remit of EU rules.
They have this list of people who are coming to the EU because there's no controls between EU countries. So this is quite dangerous if Hungary is basically saying we are going to open the door for pretty much everybody coming from Belarus or Russia.
Mr. President, excuse me.
The leader of the EPP has also called on EU leaders to take the necessary measures to protect the integrity of the Schengen area. Analysts and EU leaders also say that should Budapest decide to go through with this move, it could become the first EU member state to have its Schengen status suspended or revoked.
There is a question that is becoming more and more urgent. What is Hungary seeking, and does it still consider itself a member of the EU? Recent events may suggest that Hungary is seeking to become a member of a different alliance. There are other alliances to the east of us that it may consider joining.
Budapest remains defiant in the face of the EU's concerns, with a Hungarian government spokesperson calling them Weber's lies. This points to tensions surrounding the dispute likely rising for the foreseeable future.
Hamas political chief Ismail Haniyeh was killed overnight in the Iranian capital. This dramatic development comes less than 24 hours after the IDF confirmed carrying out an airstrike on the Hezbollah stronghold in Beirut, killing the organization's top commander Fouad Shukr, whom the Israeli military says carried out the Majd al-Shams rocket attack that killed 12 Druze children. We're now going live to our correspondent Diana Skaya, who is in Tel Aviv, for the latest updates. Hello, Diana. Can you hear me?
Good evening, Claudia.
Good evening. So has Israel's involvement in the killing of Haniyeh been confirmed? What do we know about his successor? And how, most importantly, do you think this will change the course of war?
Claudia, as we speak, Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu was speaking from the Kiryat, the military headquarters in Tel Aviv, where he spoke to addressing particularly Israeli citizens, saying, first of all, that if Iran or Beirut, the Islamic Republic of Iran or Beirut choose to retaliate, then Israel will be ready for any given scenario. Now, he mentioned a lot of things during his speech. However, the only thing he did not mention or talk about at all was confirming that Israel carried out this strike in Tehran that killed Hamas chief Ismail Haniyeh. Israel all day has not said a word, has not confirmed anything. They did, however, confirm carrying out the strike in Beirut, in the southern suburb of Beirut, which killed the Hezbollah commander who was responsible for that Majd al-Shams massacre that killed those 12 children. However, like I mentioned, Israel, no word on the killing of Haniyeh. On the contrary, today in Israel, there was actually people giving out the sweet watermelon fruits to passers-by, celebrating his death, celebrating his outing. Of course, the Palestinian President Mahmoud Abbas did speak out, calling it quite a tragedy, calling it despicable, saying that this should have never have happened. Now, what we do know in the developing part so far is that reportedly, this coming, of course, from Iranian media, is that Ismail Haniyeh's bodyguard is the one that leaked information to the assassins who then targeted an Israeli missile into the room in the safe house where Ismail Haniyeh was sleeping. Now, the attack occurred at around 2 o'clock this morning. What we also know is that tomorrow, Haniyeh's funeral will be taking place in Tehran, and then his body will be sent then to Doha in Qatar, where he will be buried on Friday in a cemetery there. Now, really, this is also coming a little bit of a blow to the security, to the Iranian security system, and quite challenging since they actually were a little bit open. I mean, Haniyeh was walking around freely in Turkey, walking around freely in Qatar, in Iran, thinking that he was invincible, yet something like this, probably never assuming that something like this could have happened. Now, of course, Israel is on high alert. Iran, of course, the Ayatollah Khamenei did say that he would not, that he would retaliate. He's thinking of retaliating. Iran's new president as well really lashed out on Israel, and Israel, of course, is on high alert. However, only a time will tell whether or not this will go into something even more excruciating as it is now. Claudia?
A great extensive report. Thank you so much, Diana Skaya, coming to us live from Tel Aviv. And now, international star Taylor Swift is making rounds across the world, and this week she's coming to Warsaw. Our very own Katarzyna Nowicka has prepared this report.
For 3 nights only, Taylor Swift, a major icon that's made headway internationally, is making her first appearance in Warsaw. But already one day before night one, a massive crowd is gathering in front of the Warsaw Stadium to greet her.
I was trying to buy tickets around the world, but gladly Taylor came here.
One way to spot a Swiftie is by looking at their wrists.
I have around 200 at home, so I will be trading with people. This is Speak Now, so that's like album, Taylor's album. That's Wonderland, and that's like song.
Have a lot. I've been working day and night on my friendship bracelets, actually, yes.
These concert goers have come to Warsaw from all over the world.
I've come from Spain just to see her.
In Mexico, the ticket was very expensive, and I didn't get a seat, so I decided to come here.
Our tickets were significantly cheaper to get them through, and the flights, including flights and hotel.
And you get a trip out of it.
And you get a trip out of it, yeah, girls trip.
Yeah.
Taylor's fans also waited for her outside the Marriott Hotel, where she was rumored to be staying the next couple of nights. Although fans don't expect her to meet them outside.
Probably not.
Just for her safety.
Yeah, probably.
She shouldn't.
I don't think so. I think she's too big star. Like, it's too many people for her.
We saw the same exact phenomenon 28 years ago when the king of pop, Michael Jackson, performed in Warsaw. Massive crowds greeted him at the same hotel. Now let's talk business. Swiftonomics, or the study of how Taylor's presence in a country impacts its economy, predicts an extra 45 million euros for Warsaw. We visited a restaurant nearby that's already preparing for the influx of Swifties with a special offer.
We offer a 15% discount for everyone who has a ticket for this concert. We decided to follow that trend and just, support people who listen to Taylor Swift, because a lot of queers do that.
Soon, the Polish capital will be swarmed by concert-goers, and it's not only for the main event at the Warsaw Stadium. Locals are bracing for impact, and local businesses are preparing to rake in the cash. For TVP World, I'm Katarzyna Nowicka.
The Warsaw Uprising is among the most heroic events in World War II history in Poland. Sadly, as a result of the military action initiated by Home Army Command against Nazi German occupier, 200,000 Warsaw inhabitants perished, and up to 80% of the capital was ruthlessly destroyed. Regardless, the Uprising anniversary remains one of the most important events in the Polish calendar, and for generations of Poles, with many, myself included, honoring the memory of their ancestors who took part in the fighting. To talk about the Uprising and its place in modern European history, I'm joined by Justin Maciejewski, DSO MBE Director of the National Army Museum in London, and a son of a Warsaw insurgent and a Home Army soldier himself. Thank you so much for joining me in the studio on this very important night.
It's a pleasure to be joining you here tonight and your viewers for this on the eve of this important anniversary.
So I wanted to start by having your side of the story. You live in London, you work in London, your family is located there, but you decided to join the 80th anniversary of the Warsaw Uprising. Why?
My father's buried here, and with his twin brother, who was identical twin brother, who was killed during the Warsaw Rising. So I think since his death, obviously coming here, not every year, but regularly, just to honour his life and the life of his brother, my uncle, who I'm named after, Władysław, is an important part of our lives. And I brought my sons here. My wife is here with me for this anniversary. So honouring that service and that sacrifice in 1944 is an important thing to do for us as a family.
I can imagine that it must be quite a different experience for you, knowing that one part of your family comes from Warsaw and comes from Poland and has this sort of an experience, and the other part comes from Great Britain, two allies during World War II. How does it make you feel? How do you look at this whole event and the story of your family that's related to it?
Yes, that's a great question. I mean, this is a shared history in many respects. Obviously, what happened at Yalta and after the war was terrible for Poland. But of course, Britain and Churchill tried hard not to do what was decided at Yalta. Roosevelt in America was the dominant power at that point. I think there was a big sense of guilt in Britain about Yalta. And yet, Britain was the country in which my father found freedom. And my father found a home after the war. And we grew up in Britain. And of course, over 250,000 Poles fought with Britain, shoulder to shoulder, throughout the Second World War. So the Second World War is a shared history. Many British pilots died flying supplies to Warsaw during the Warsaw Rising, often forgotten. But it's this battle here in Warsaw, although obviously it's very much a Polish battle, is something where there is a shared history with Britain. And partly because so many of the Polish Home Army soldiers who couldn't come back to Poland after the Second World War found their homes in Britain and brought up families. So I regard this history, this story, and the aftermath and the legacy as very much a shared story between Britain and Poland.
You also mentioned that you come here to commemorate your father and his brother who died during the Warsaw Uprising, and you mentioned your family. I remember that we had a chance to speak in London about it at the National Army Museum, and you said it's incredibly important for you to share this history with your children. Why is that?
Well, I think that the Warsaw Rising was a terrible dilemma for those people of Warsaw and the commanders in the Home Army in 1944. What to do? Do we resist? Do we stay silent? Do we wait? Do we rise up now? This was an excruciating dilemma for everyone involved. And there are no easy answers. Mm-hmm. But ultimately they made the decision to stand up and fight for freedom and fight for what was right. And of course the consequences were tragic and horrific, because they were up against evil. And so I think why this is an important story, this is perhaps one of those chapters in history where it is simply good against evil. And there are moments in people's lives where people have to stand up. They have to fight. Even if the consequences might be terrible, the consequences of not doing something are even worse, potentially. And I think those lessons and those values that are tied up in those lessons are incredibly important lessons to hand on to the next generation.
I can tell that this is a very emotional subject, and obviously both of us having relatives who took part in the Warsaw Uprising, we are looking at a different side of history. I actually also brought the armband that belongs to our family, which is incredibly important, something that stayed as a memory for us, and it reminds us every day about the significance of actually taking up the arms when we're faced with evil. And this is something that I want to keep for my kids and hopefully for their kids in the future. However, we need to look at the difficult side of this conversation. Obviously, as I mentioned in the intro, 200,000 people from Warsaw died. There was also the Wola massacre happening on the 5th of August 1944. We are looking at the destruction of the capital. 80% of the capital, around 80%, was destroyed. And some people, some experts and historians claim that there was no chance of success for the Warsaw Uprising. With your particular vantage point, what is your opinion on this statement?
I mean, this is a great question, and there's no simple answer to this question. What happened in Warsaw was simply horrific. It's difficult to comprehend 80 years later. But 80 years later, Warsaw is a vibrant city. I've been walking around here today with my wife, having a fantastic morning in this wonderful city. And in many ways, given the evil that Warsaw was facing, Warsaw had to be destroyed in order to be saved. In other words, the soul of Warsaw, in many ways, was preserved by their willingness to fight for good against evil. And I think this is a very difficult thing to comprehend, but compromising with evil would have left somehow a stain on the soul of Warsaw in a way that the soul is somehow is not stained because of this tragic event. And my father was always hot and cold about the Warsaw Rising through his life. Sometimes he would say it was necessary, and other times he would say, why did we do it? So even my father, who fought in the Warsaw Rising, as a child growing up, he was always conflicted between, was it mad or was it right? And he never answered that question in his lifetime, I don't think. I think he was always carried this dilemma. Mm-hmm. But this is a dilemma that most of our generation haven't had to face in reality.
Indeed.
So it's very difficult to judge. But I think what we can say is that the 80 years following the Rising have seen Warsaw regrow through all the trials and the suffering of communism into this vibrant city that we have today. And the Warsaw Rising is such an important part of that unbroken story.
So you know the British military, you know the military, and whatever the decision-making process looks like yourself. There was definitely a discussion among the Home Army members, and this decision was made by the command. Do you think that the uprising would have taken place anyway if it would be just up to the civilians who had to undergo 6 years, by that point 5 years of occupation, of Nazi German occupation, or was this solely due to the decision made by the Home Army?
That's a good question. I think it's true to say, from the evidence we have, that when the Rising was launched, it was popular. There was a sense of optimism because, of course, they could see the Red Army approaching, and they realised they could hear the guns of the Red Army. So
it was a big hope.
It was a big hope
that they will help.
It was a big hope. It was a big hope. But nevertheless, I think you can say from the evidence that at the beginning there was a sense of optimism in those first few days of the Rising, and therefore I think it would be wrong to say the decision was purely a military one. I think there was a groundswell. I think it's also worth reflecting on how much Warsaw had already suffered with the murdering of all the people in the ghetto and the destruction of the ghetto in the previous year, and of course the destruction in 1939. So the people of Warsaw by 1944 knew what the war was going to bring them, and so in many ways they had nothing to lose. So I think that this is incredibly complicated. I think the most important thing for us to do is not to judge either one way or the other, but merely to reflect on the values and the courage of those that took part in the Warsaw Rising, both civilians and the Home Army.
I would like to take a look at the Warsaw Uprising from a different perspective, from the British perspective. The generations of people living in Britain right now, including the young generations, is there any knowledge of the Warsaw Uprising in Great Britain, or is this a new chapter where the discussion is simply opening this very moment to reveal the history that might have been, out of sight for some Brits in the UK?
Another great question. We mustn't forget that in August 1944, the British Army was fighting in Normandy, and they were suffering casualties that they had not suffered since the First World War.
A big trauma.
A big trauma. So Britain's focus in August 1944 was the countryside beyond the beaches of Normandy. The liberation of Northwest Europe had commenced with D-Day, and of course the Polish were also involved in that campaign with General Maczek and his division. But the eyes of Britain were very firmly on Normandy. And of course the breakout from Normandy towards Belgium and Holland and towards Germany itself to destroy Nazi Germany. So Britain was playing its part in the West. So in 1944, Britain was aware of the Warsaw Rising. People were very much aware of it, but there was a sense of powerlessness as to what to do about the Warsaw Rising. And that's why the Royal Air Force flew planes from Italy all the way to Poland, the longest flight ever by the Royal Air Force, to drop supplies into Warsaw during September of 1944. Since the Second World War, the history of this rising has been not well known in Britain. When people in Britain think about Warsaw and risings, they think about the ghetto in 43 rather than the Warsaw Rising. That is changing now because we have nearly 1 million Polish people living in Britain who are British, Polish, and therefore this sense of shared history is much stronger now than it was when I was a child 40 years ago. So I think every year that passes, there's a greater awareness in Britain, through its connections with Poland, of this incredibly courageous but also tragic chapter in Poland's history.
It's definitely a tragic chapter, but definitely an event that we keep learning from. It's been 80 years since that very event. The anniversary is taking place tomorrow, and I know that you're here with the family to commemorate it as well, and we thank you for it. And I thank you for joining us here in the studio on the eve of this important anniversary. It's a pleasure, as always, to speak to you.
Thank you so much. It's a pleasure to be here.
That's all mine.
Thank you.
Ladies and gentlemen, that was Justin Maciejewski, the director of the National Army Museum, and this would be all the latest news for now here on World News Tonight. Please stay tuned here on TVP World for more news and features.